we will call the proposing team, University of West Indies. First speaker, Abigail Durand.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator, honorable judges, my most worthy opponents, and the audience listening via media. The Caribbean Human Development Report of 2012, prepared by the United Nations Development Programme, states that, with the exception of Barbados and Suriname, homicide rates, including gang-related killings, have increased substantially in the last 12 years across the Caribbean, while they have been falling or stabilizing in other parts of the world. The issue for discussion here tonight is whether or not the death penalty should be enforced in the Caribbean states. It is important, therefore, to define the key term of the moot. According to Commonwealth Caribbean Criminal Practice and Procedure, the death penalty was for years considered the mandatory sentence for murder throughout the region. All capital sentences are invariably for murder, and this sentence is executed by hanging. We, the UWI Open Campus team, strongly support the motion of hanging as a form of capital punishment in the Caribbean. We believe that the enforcement of this penalty, among other things in our courts of law, will 1. Act as a crime deterrent for would-be criminals, 2. Would provide closure for families of murder victims, and 3. Is a just means to curb the alarming trend of crime in the Caribbean. In the first place, Mr. Moderator, enforcing the death penalty will deter murderers. According to Ernest van der Haag, PhD, late professor of jurisprudence at Fordham University, people fear nothing more than death. Therefore, nothing will deter a criminal more than the fear of the death penalty. Society has always used punishment to discourage would-be criminals from unlawful action. Since society has the highest interest in preventing murder, it should use the strongest punishment available to deter murder, and that is the death penalty. My worthy opponents will tell you that a death penalty is not the only punishment that society can mete out. However, criminals clearly prefer the alternative of a prison sentence, and this acts as less of a deterrent. Therefore, we must put in place the death sentence as long as it is possible that these executions protect citizens from future murder. It is clear that there are positive societal spin-offs from implementing the death penalty. There is prior evidence of its effect in Trinidad and Tobago. The Trinidad and Tobago Guardian reported that during the period of 1994 Glen Ashby and 1999 Dole Chady executions, murders fell by 24% over this period, only to exponentially rise when the implicit threat of the executions being implemented subsided. Secondly, the death penalty not only acts as a deterrent for criminals, but it also allows closure for families. Let us consider this issue not from a humanitarian perspective, but from a utilitarian perspective. The Cavendish Lockhart series defines ideal rule utilitarianism as where an act or measure is regarded as being right if it is permitted by a rule, which if generally followed will on the whole have as good or better consequences than any other rule governing the same act. In this case, it will mean that the death penalty, a law written in our own constitution, would have as good or better consequences than a life imprisonment sentence. Members of the audience, can you imagine sitting at a restaurant, or any public place in fact, and see the convicted murderer of your child, your mother, your father, or your lover walk into the room smiling, laughing, and enjoying their life while your loved one lies 6 feet under, violently taken in their prime? How would you feel? Families of the victims of murder will have no fear of the criminals responsible for the death of their loved ones being released from the prison system and opening old wounds. This friction often leads ultimately to members of society dissatisfied with the conviction, taking matters into their own hands, seeking justice for themselves and their families. Therefore, by taking a utilitarian stance on this issue, rather than a humanitarian stance, more people will be contented with the outcome of the sentencing than that of a prison sentence. We are not proposing that this sentence be used indiscriminately for any and every case. As with any other judicial process, there are procedures to be undertaken. After being judged by their peers and sentenced by a judge, this criminal still has a chance to appeal their case within a 5-year period. Often, this death sentence is frowned upon as it is considered inhumane by some. However, simply because an execution method may result in pain either by accident or as an inescapable consequence of death does not establish the sort of objectively intolerable risk of harm that qualifies as cruel or unusual. In addition, some may contend that a death penalty is inherently immoral because governments should never take life, no matter what the provocation. But this is an article of faith, not of fact. The death penalty honors human dignity by treating the defendant as a free moral actor, able to control his destiny for good or for ill. It does not treat him as an animal with no moral sense. My opponents will try to convince you that a death penalty is more expensive than life imprisonment. However, the Office of Legislative Research for the Connecticut General Assembly, in its April 2000 study titled Comparison of Capital Punishment Costs in Texas, concluded that there are several problems involved in trying to determine the cost of a capital case. First, there is a wide variety of costs associated with capital cases, including costs for attorneys, witnesses, and jury consultants. Another problem is the length and complexity of the case. Lastly, one has to consider the way that the state budgets money for entities that are involved in capital cases. Therefore, it is near impossible to estimate the cost of execution in the Caribbean, as there is no precedence, unlike that of the United States, where most of the studies have been conducted. Thus, it cannot be stated as a fact that life imprisonment is less expensive in the Caribbean than a death penalty, as this cost has never been calculated. Members of the audience, think of the most brutal, senseless murder you can imagine that has happened in Dominica. What happened to that criminal? He was sent to prison to eat well, to sleep comfortably, live safely under protected shelter, and maybe even learn a skill or two. All of this on our tax money in this time of economic recession where every dollar counts. We are paying to afford one who has committed a crime against society luxuries that some of us cannot afford ourselves. Before I leave you, I want you to consider this. This Christmas, only 1 month away, while some of us are eating macaroni and cheese for dinner, convicted murderers and convicted criminals will be supping on turkey and ham paid for on your own pockets. I thank you.
Well, I promise you we'll get hot in here. The first speaker from the State College in the first response, Jose Thomas.
Honorable judges, Mr. Moderator, my colleague, my opponents, and members of the audience, I bid you a warm good evening. It is with great pleasure and confidence I address you, and my colleagues and I insist that we should not support the use of the death penalty within Eastern Caribbean states. Mr. Moderator, allow me to define and clarify the key term of this proposal. Oxford Dictionary defines capital punishment as legally authorized killing of someone as a punishment for a crime. Honorable judges, my arguments today are hinged on the following areas. 1. Capital punishment does not serve as a deterrent. 2. Supporting the use of the death penalty would diminish the value of human life. 3. The high possibility of executing someone who is innocent. And 4. The glitches in the composition of capital punishment would not fit within the society of the Eastern Caribbean. Primarily, capital punishment does not serve as a deterrent. According to Amnesty International, a 2006 survey, and I quote, "Murder rates in the United States that apply the death penalty are higher than the rates of other states," end of quote. For example, states that support the death penalty, such as Texas and Florida, have a higher murder rate than states that do not. A survey of experts from the American Society of Criminology, dated April 2011, showed that the overwhelming majority did not believe that the death penalty is a proven deterrent to homicide. Over 80% believe that the existing research fails to support a deterrence justification for the death penalty. Similarly, over 75% of those polled did not believe that the increasing number of executions would provide a general deterrent effect. It further establishes that the United States establishes that since its reinstatement in 1976, more than 1,200 people have been executed and 3,000 are currently on death row. However, we do not need to cross the Atlantic Ocean to see an example of the failure of the death penalty to deter criminal activity. Take a look at Trinidad and Tobago, a Caribbean island who imposes the death penalty. The Trinidad Guardian newspaper, dated February 1st, 2011, stated, and I quote, "Trinidad and Tobago has 42 prisoners on death row who are awaiting execution," end of quote. Between 2002 and 2010, the murder rate was an average of 416 murders a year. Does capital punishment deter crime? Absolutely not. Furthermore, when looking at deterrence of capital crimes, one must not only consider organized crimes, but rather the vast majority of emotional crimes and crimes committed by the mentally unstable. A man who commits a crime purely out of rage does not fathom the consequences during the crime, nor does a mentally ill person know the difference between right or wrong. Therefore, nothing could have been done to deter him. Additionally, supporting the use of capital punishment would diminish the value of human life. I ask you, worthy opponents, is it right or morally justifiable to rank life worth? The answer, no. Under no circumstances is it right for our legal system to seek to create a chart of life rank. According to the Universal Declaration of the Human Rights, dated 1948, Article 3 states, and I quote, "Everyone has the fundamental right to life," end of quote. Capital punishment violates the right to life and the right to be free from cruel, inhumane, and degrading punishment. Capital punishment enforces kill one to save one. This dangerous and highly controversial act will lend itself to social turmoil. Letting the people know that their life rank is a judgment of the state will limit, and in a very possible and severe case, remove all forms of trust between the people and its government. Honorable judges, we should not support the use of the death penalty because of the high possibility of executing someone who is innocent. Honorable judges, all humans are limited. Regardless of evidence put before a court, regardless of a conviction of a criminal by a jury of its peers, it is quite possible, even after a prolonged period of time, to execute an individual who is innocent. What do we do in such a situation? To enforce the death penalty is to highlight a flaw in our legal system, the flaw of uncertainty. Yes, guilt and innocence is separated after conviction, but it is no fairy tale that innocent persons lie bounded behind bars. In 1992, Cameron Todd Willingham was convicted of arson murder in Texas. In 2004, he was put to death. Unfortunately, the Texas Forensic Science Commission later found that the evidence was misinterpreted, and they concluded that none of the evidence used against him was valid. Willingham was put to death, executed for a crime he did not commit, betrayed by a government that was supposed to protect him. Mind you, the evidence used to convict him was foolproof, according to Benjamin Yeshiva School of Law. There are others such as Carlos De Luna and Larry Griffin, all convicted of murder and executed, but today their guilt is questioned. My opponents may seek to rebut that the flaw exists in our present legal system, but I ask you, is it better for a man to die for a crime he did not commit or to live his life out in confinement? One cannot bring back the dead. According to NSBC dated 12 December 2009, James Bain was convicted of kidnapping, burglary, and rape. After 3 long, gruesome decades in jail, he was extradited due to DNA evidence that proved he was innocent. 3 decades of life gone, but he is still alive. If the death penalty was imposed, after a mere 5 years, the government would be left to say an unfulfilling sorry. Many are thankful that the death penalty was not imposed upon them. People like Raymond Towler and Anton Logas, and the list goes on for miles. Within the Eastern Caribbean, our population is so small that it is not wise. As a matter of fact, we have no business killing our population. Mr. Moderator, the glitches in the composition of capital punishment would not fit within the society of the Eastern Caribbean. For capital punishment to be at its most successful level, there are certain aspects of our legal system that must be on their P's and Q's. Aspects such as forensic, collection of evidence without contamination, prompt and correct police investigation. These are the aspects that Eastern Caribbean needs to pay attention to, rather than plummeting into capital punishment without these aspects in place. According to the AIUSA Death Penalty Abolishment Campaign dated May 2012, factors leading to wrongful conviction include inadequate legal representation, police and prosecution misconduct, purged testimony and mistaken eyewitness accounts, racial prejudice, jailhouse testimony, suppression and or misinterpretation of mitigating factors, and political pressure to solve a crime. Honorable judges, pay close attention. Even at its most successful level, capital punishment does not provide 100% guarantee of anything, not deterrence or even to kill the right individual. As I leave you, I say we should not implement the death penalty in the Eastern Caribbean states.
That speaker just slightly went over the time, so we will have to give the other speaker a minute extra, okay, in 7 minutes. We have the second speaker for the university, Kadisha Jno Baptiste.
Distinguished judges, Mr. Moderator, my worthy opponents, my colleagues, members of the audience, both here and those listening via Radioland, a pleasant good evening to you. I am here to support the point that my colleague Abigail has so strongly explained. We must continue to uphold the death penalty. My worthy opponents, it appears that you have forgotten that this debate is for the Eastern Caribbean and not the United States. My opponents gave statistics in the United States. However, they claim that the death penalty will not fit within the Eastern Caribbean society. They gave statistics in Trinidad and Tobago and stated that men have been sentenced to death, to the death penalty. However, none have been hung since 1999, and therefore one cannot argue that this is not a deterrent, as it has been a sentence that is not enforced. As my colleague Abigail unmistakably explained, the death penalty can serve as a crime deterrent. It is a just means of punishment for an offense, and helps bring closure to the grieving families. I will further support our notion for the upholding of the death penalty by explaining: 1. People who commit murders should be sentenced to death since they cause an economic and financial loss on society. And 2, the death penalty ensures that perpetrators of heinous crimes never have an opportunity to cause future tragedy. To begin with, most noble judges, it appears that my worthy opponents want you to believe that the death penalty should not be used as a punishment in the Eastern Caribbean. They would like to have you believe that it is completely inhumane to implement the death penalty on a person who has committed a murder or some other sort of crime. It appears that my opponents must have amnesia. Have you forgotten about the rise in crime, especially among the youth over the last few years? Have you forgotten about the number of persons left to mourn? The number of mothers given the task of burying their young sons or watching their children grow up fatherless? Have you forgotten, my most worthy opponents, the economic situation knocking at our Dominican doors? I must challenge you to stop and think about the type of effect that one murder has on the entire economy, the people, and the country. Take, for instance, an individual serving a 25-year sentence after murdering the father of 5 children for absolutely no good reason. The amount of money spent to feed and look after that criminal is insurmountable. My worthy opponents, please explain to me why hard-working taxpayers should spend their hard-earned cash to feed criminals who most of the time have nothing to offer to society and contribute to tarnishing the most beautiful name of our nature isle. Perhaps the victim was a member of his village cultural group. Maybe he was a government worker. He could have been one who was involved in community service, and then he meets his tragic death by the knife of another individual. This victim has to be replaced at a cost. His invaluable bank of skills is now lost. How are we so sure that these skills can be replaced? We must also examine the financial burden left on the family of the victim. Imagine a mother of 5 left to tend for 5 children and herself because the sole breadwinner of her family was brutally murdered. You and I both know that in this small island of ours, families do not receive sufficient compensation for the loss of their loved ones. My worthy opponents, are you claiming that another family should grow up with added challenges, with one less parent figure, and without receiving proper justification? I would hate to believe that this is what you are trying to promote in this country of ours. Are you telling criminals that they can commit heinous crimes and walk away? Recently, we saw a murder of a man who was killed by a man who was not new to the charge. In this case, the defendant served a sentence of about 9 years for committing 2 separate murders. Distinguished judges, this man is now back on the streets of Dominica, and I am sure is back to his same devices. Thus, I further reinforce the point that the death penalty will deter criminals who commit heinous crimes from committing the same or worse crimes in the future. Too often we come across crimes which are committed by people who are already before the courts for similar offenses or the exact same offense. Right here in Dominica, we have come across murders which were committed by persons who are out on bail for the similar offense. Once is too many times for such a situation. By implementing the use of the death penalty, would-be criminals would think twice before they act. This can safely be described as a sure way of reducing the number of murders or acts of violence amongst our Dominican people. My colleague Abigail also introduced you to the idea of criminals allowed to appeal. You, my worthy opponents, although we stand firm on the belief that the death penalty should be used as a way to deter criminals and help curb the rise of crime, we are not afraid to say that we need to safeguard our country. Let me take you to the case of Pratt and Morgan in Jamaica. The defendant was sentenced to hang. However, his sentence was overturned as a result of spending more than 5 years on death row. According to the Privy Council, it is inhumane to have someone wait on death row for more than 5 years. Members of the audience, my colleagues and I are by no means trying to say that everyone who takes the life of another should be sentenced to hang. However, we demand swift justice. There is a need for structural changes in the judicial system to bring perpetrators to justice swiftly. We demand better trained police officers, swifter passages of cases, reforms to move indictable cases such as murder to the High Court without wasting time at the Magistrates' Court. We need proper forensic science labs. We need safe convictions. Judges, is it fair to the family of a patriotic woman who was peacefully sleeping in her bed, who lost her life to the knife of an idle teenager, to see the alleged murderer walking on the street in the next 10 to 15 years? My worthy opponents, I am appalled that you should sit here and support this insanity. In the case of Benjamin versus R, 1964, wasn't it established that one principle of sentencing is deterrence vis-a-vis potential offenders and deterrence vis-a-vis the particular offender? Honorable judges, members of the audience, I urge you, do not be swayed by the words of my most worthy opponents. The use of the death penalty will undoubtedly deter crime. It is time that we stand up for our brothers, stand up for our daughters, our sisters, our mothers, our grandmothers. Stand up for Dominica. I thank you.
Yes, while you're listening, I mean, it's good to actually look at the strategy of the team to see whether or not they have chosen the right speakers in the right places. We have the second speaker here, Jernelle John Baptiste.
Worthy opponents, where are your statistics to prove the rising crime? Honorable judges, we come before you equipped with statistics to show that capital punishment should not be implemented. Honorable judges, my arguments today are hinged on the following. The cost of capital punishment would be detrimental to the economy. Capital punishment is a primitive form of social control, and endorsing capital punishment would erode the moral rectitude of our country. Opponents, a disadvantage of capital punishment is that execution is often more costly for the state than life imprisonment would be, and that is due to the appeals process. Contrary to what my opponents have said, imprisonment is better financially for the state in comparison to an execution. According to IAUSA, in 2003, legislative audit in Kansas found that the estimated cost of the death penalty was 70% more than the cost of comparable to a non-death penalty case. Death penalty case costs were counted through to execution and amounted to a median cost of $1.26 million, whereas non-death penalty case costs was $740,000. A non-death penalty case was significantly less financially. Now, apply this to the Eastern Caribbean islands. Most of us don't see that amount of money in circulation within a year. Now, we are considering a death penalty to cripple our pockets. We are paying to kill a criminal, whereas his skills and manpower could be put to better use in confinement to better the society. As stated by the California Commission of the Fair Administrative Justice as at July 2008, in California, the current cost system costs $137 million per year. It will cost a mere $11.5 million for a system without the death penalty. Additionally, another disadvantage of capital punishment is that it is an age-old barbaric form of social control. As defined by Merriam-Webster Dictionary, humane is marked by compassion, sympathy, or consideration for human or animals. An execution is the ultimate denial of human rights, as victims are justifiably killed by the state for crimes they may or may not have done, but are found guilty of. In Dominica, the primary form of execution is death by hanging. This has been proven to be inhumane. According to BBC's To Kill a Human Being from 2008, death by hanging depends on the anatomy and physiology of the convicted. The objective of hanging is to create what is called a hangman's fracture. The fracture of cervical bones causes damage to the brainstem and death of the individual. The glitch of this system occurs when an individual is dropped from too high of a height, which results in decapitation of the individual. As with the case of Saddam Hussein's half-brother, Brazan Ibrahim, in which his head was completely severed from his body. Clearly, this is a very inhumane form of execution. Even the most widely used of capital punishment, which is death, relief, and injection, has glitches. According to Amnesty International process of relief and injection, the prisoner is bound to a gurney while 2 needles are inserted into the veins. Pentobarbital, which is a short anesthetic, is then administered to the convicted, after which pancuronium boride is released. This drug induces muscle paralysis. However, if the patient is conscious at the moment it is released, then the patient will undergo excruciating pain to which they will be unable to show. Finally, potassium chloride is administered. This drug induces a heart attack and causes the death of the patient. Basically, a human being is slowly tortured to death. This form of execution includes the involvement of health personnel. Virtually all codes of professional ethics oppose their participation. However, by law, they are required to be here, hereby breaking their vows to accommodate the state. Other forms of execution include firing squad, gas chamber, and electrocution. I implore you to ask this: what is humane about killing a human being? Absolutely nothing. Lastly, another disadvantage of capital punishment is that it erodes our moral rectitude. Dominica, as well as the other Eastern Caribbean states, are predominantly Catholic Christian. Dominica boasts of being blessed by God, so much so that its coat of arms proudly bear the terms Apue Bode c'est la terre, after God the earth. To support the use of the death penalty would be sending conflicting messages. Reverence for God means a respect for all forms of life. How then can we revere God if we take the life of a human being in the name of justice? According to Gandhi, an eye for an eye and the whole world goes blind. This statement is in fact true. Why should we resort to the same violent act of the criminals? Rather, we can grant them a life of incarceration, hereby granting justice by making them contribute to the development of society. Conclusively, the detriment to the economy, the barbaric form of social control, and the undermining of our formidable Christian belief after God, the earth, makes the death penalty the inconclusive resort for any solution to deviance and violence within the society. I thank you.
Well, I continue to be inspired by the level of the discussion here this evening. And I can only wish that some of our member of parliaments were here to learn this craft. But we will call to the podium the last speaker for the UWI, Dominique Newton.
Begin them? Begin, okay. Esteemed judges, my worthy opponents, and my audience. Again, good evening. Firstly, I'd like to make mention that my opponents have given statistics from the US, from Amnesty International, from many countries other than the Caribbean. But I ask, what of Caribbean statistics? What of Dominican statistics? I have seen no statistics as of the death penalty, of the number of deaths in Dominica. What of us? I would also like to make mention that the US and these nations cannot be compared to Dominica. It cannot. We have completely different standards. Now, as we come to the end of this heated debate, I echo the sentiments of my fellow colleagues that the death penalty should remain and should be included on our remain on our Constitution. Now, capital punishment is a form of retributive punishment, with the deterrent effect being but one aspect to the right of life. Yet, the deterrent effect, which is constantly debated even here today, is neither the main nor the only justification of its institution. Capital punishment is exactly that, the punishment of capital crimes. The sentence of a life imprisonment is not seeking full justice to the extent of the crime. As long as that murderer remains alive, even in prison, then justice has not been served to its full potential. Now, the living murderer, whether incarcerated or not, holds an increasingly unfair advantage over the victim, as in many cases, the murderer remains alive. As my colleague said, that murderer is able to roam free in society. Now, my opponents have stated that an angry man cannot think rationally. An angry man cannot think rationally. So I ask the members of the audience, if every angry man who did not think rationally before he killed another man were to roam the streets and to be set free, would there be justice? No, chaos. My opponents also say that there's a flaw in our legal system, that our government, that our judicial system is flawed. But what is this flaw? I have heard no mention of it. Is it flawed that our government wishes to punish those who have wronged our society? Those who have taken the lives of our brothers and sisters and mothers and grandparents? No. My opponents say that capital punishment is not 100%, and that it does not deter crime nor anything else, said the first speaker. But I ask them, what is guaranteed 100%? By allowing that man to roam free, by giving that man a license to walk our streets, can you guarantee me, my opponents, can you place your hand on fire that that man would not kill, let's say 2, 3, 5 other people? Can you guarantee me that? My opponents argue that killing a killer is not justified. Amnesty International, stated by my opponents, believe that the death penalty is the ultimate denial of human rights. They exaggerate that killing is a form of retribution and murder, and that it is government's fault. Both they, that is Amnesty International, and my opponents equate execution and murder, reasoning that if the two acts have the same result, then they are equivalent, that they possess the same moral equivalency. But I ask you then, is the legal seizing of property the same to satisfy a debt, the same as auto theft? Both result in the loss of property. Are kidnapping and legal incarceration equivalent? Both, after all, do involve the imprisonment against one's will? No. How absurd and flawed then are my opponent's logic and reasoning skills? Their attempt at equivalencies failed due to their lack of logic, their lack of reality. This cliched argument that kill one to save one holds no base in this debate. This belief by my opponents is an obvious neglect for and the abuse of semantics. We, on the other hand, believe that once the murderer commits the crime under a certain criteria, as stated by the second speaker, Kadisha Jno Baptiste, and that the judgment remains uncorrupt, that is to maintain justice within our society, then the death penalty is justifiable means of punishment. We also believe that the killer should not lie in a state prison with 3 meals a day, clean sheets, family visits, and endless appeals. For justice to prevail, my dear audience, my esteemed judges, my opponents, strict punishments must be dealt. The death penalty must be enacted. On legal terms, the capital punishment is well within the extent of our law. It is on our Constitution. My audience, do you really believe that the right to life only applies to those who have broken the law? Or does it apply to those who have upheld the law, who are law-abiding citizens? I think the latter. Our opponents have continued to argue that the deterrent effect of the death penalty is not very effective. That is nonsense. The institution of death penalty is not only to deter crime, though of course that is a benefit. The death penalty, my dear friends, is retribution. Retribution, it brings closure to the families and to society. And, the death penalty brings retribution and closure to families and members of society. And the deterrent aspect is only but one byproduct of this effect. Now, there are many cases in which people control their emotions, their actions, and realize the punishment for their crimes. I too have thought of my actions before I cursed someone else, before I disrespected my parents. Murder is no different. The people in my country are strong-willed. Dominicans are strong-willed, and they are well-equipped to know what they want. I believe that if I am to have a consensus, if a census is to be drawn from this forum, that the majority of audience within this setting will say that the death penalty should be enacted. Most distinguished judges, my opponents. Now, the most distinguished judges, members of the audience, my apologies. If the death penalty is not a deterrent and we execute, then we are executing the worst human rights violators. If the death penalty is a deterrent and we execute, then we are executing those criminals and saving the lives of the innocent ones. Judges, members of the audience, my opponents, these criminals strike a great fear into the average lives of the person because of the sadistic nature of these crimes. The average, everyday, law-abiding citizen should not be put in a situation in which they fear their life, in which they fear that the man next to them is about to kill them. No, this is nonsense. Why should we stand for this in Dominica? Any state, actually. Why should we stand for it? I say to you that these sadistic individuals who commit such heinous and disrespectful actions, crimes against our people, against our society, these individuals must suffer equivalent punishment for their crimes. That punishment, my dear friends, that equivalent punishment is the death penalty. I thank you.
Yes, that is the contribution by University of West Indies Open Campus. We have the final speaker from the State College, Donalie Dailey.
Opponents, since the death penalty has not been rampantly enforced in the Caribbean, it is only common sense to draw a reference from countries that has already implemented it, such as America. And it is upon the example of America that we say that death penalty should not be enforced. Honorable judges, my opponent stated that it cannot be said that the cost of death penalty will be high in the Eastern Caribbean because we did not calculate it. Worthy opponents, if we are to use the death penalty in the Caribbean, we are to estimate the cost of it. How will you go about doing that? First resolution is to look at the accurate cost of other places that has already implemented the use of death penalty. Let me reiterate that legislative audit in 2003 in Kansas found that cost of the death penalty was 70% more than the cost of the comparable non-death penalty case. Death penalty case were counted through cost of execution amounted to median cost $1.26 million US. Apply this to Eastern Caribbean. We do not see that money circulating within a year. Opponents, we do remember the economic problem that are at our door.
Exactly the reason why we cannot afford to cripple our pockets with the cost like what other places are spending on death penalty cases. When this amount of money is not circulating in our economy, according to you, we are faced with an economic problem. Honorable judges, I sat and I listened to my opponents rank human life, degrading a criminal as if he was nothing. And she has done all of this just at the thought of capital punishment. Think of what will happen when it is enforced, nothing but malice. Honorable judges, my opponent stated capital punishment will act as a deterrent, but the first speaker, Joseph Thomas of our team, already proved that it does not. Opponents, which survey did you receive the information that criminals prefer imprisonment? Since it was not stated in your debate, honorable judges, imprisonment is a serious punishment to capital crimes. Honorable judges, if the Universal Declaration of Human Rights tells us that everyone has the right to be free from cruel, inhumane, and degrading punishment, then who are we to go against it to implement death penalty? There is a reason why it has not been. That is the reason why it has not been implemented. Opponents, where are your statistics to prove that capital punishment deters crimes? Should we take your word for it? In an atmosphere where doubt breeds reason? Absolutely not. Honorable judges, according to Amnesty International and the American Society of Criminology, capital punishment does not deter crime. Worthy opponents, you are right. We do forensic labs, and that is why we should seek to develop them and not plummet to add a burden such as capital punishment that, combined with all the necessary utilities, will fail and do irreversible damage. Opponents, the flaw of uncertainty. Since my opponents lend a deaf ear, I will repeat, the capital punishment will highlight the flaw of uncertainty, that one cannot know for sure if a man is doubted guilty. Honorable judges, take a look at the presentation today. Who sounds more passionate and convincing? Certainly, we do. My colleagues has laid the foundation, and I have completed the structure. We should not, and I repeat, should not support the use of death penalty in Eastern Caribbean.
You know, I promised you from what I saw in the preparation, it was going to be a good evening. I want you all to stand up and give them a round of applause for this performance. We need to approach these heavy topics in the fashions that these students have demonstrated for us now. I have great spirit and hope that our future in this country rests with our young people. I'll continue to work with them as much as I can. I just want to say, if the students agree, we could meet here on a regular basis, doing this on a regular schedule. There's so many topics. There's so many topics we can discuss. Legalization of marijuana, treatment. Somebody said same sex, I'm not going there. We are too hypocritical of a society to go down that road. But would anybody want to see this on a regular basis? Similar discussion is taking place at the UN. Third committee, which is a committee where they discuss human rights issues, is discussing this very topic right now. The UN resolution was passed to the third committee proposal, the actual wording was passed on Friday, that's last Friday, which will be discussed at the General Assembly shortly. it is very important that we as a country understand the representation that those who govern us make on our behalf. And these types of forums, these types of debate, inform them, clarify the issues for them, and allow them to present the issue with a much larger consensus than otherwise we would expect. If we look at the level of appearance and debates at the UN, it's dismal. Much of this material, we haven't even appeared. So it is important that we could continue to raise the level of debate, shed light, raise the attention span of some of those who represent us, and that we do it for ourselves, one, but for those who will come after us, so that when they pick up the history of what we have done at the UN and other places, they can see that we were conscious. We were conscious at all times, and we ensured that the best position was maintained at the international forums, right? That's very, very important. I want to thank each and every student here for the level of debate I've heard. I was very impressed. I was very impressed. It's actually much more than I was expecting. So I just want to thank you all for that. I'm going to go outside and find out what's happening with the judges so I could return.
And after a lot of deliberations, after the case has gone through all kinds of deliberations, if a jury of your peers convict you and it is agreed on that the death penalty should be imposed on you, all of the appropriate things will be gone through. And if you finally get there and they say you have to die, I do not have a problem with the perpetrator dying, because all of the people who have a problem with the perpetrator dying, I want them to just for a moment stop thinking of the perpetrator and think of the victim. Was there justice for the victim? Think of how many times that victim may have begged for their life. Did the perpetrator even bother to listen? Did the perpetrator allow that victim one shred of mercy? Did the perpetrator value the life of the victim? Is there anything that we can say that would justify the senseless taking of a human life? We are concerned about implementing the death penalty in a humane way so that the perpetrator does not suffer. I don't have qualms with that. If the person suffers when they're dying, so be it. So you're hung from a very great height and your head separates from your body. The end justifies the means. You had to die, you died one way or the other. I am not making any apologies.
Now, does anybody want to come here and tell us why they do not support the death penalty?
My name is Dylan Lawrence. I personally still do not support the death penalty because it's true that sometimes you might see it necessary, but one of the basic commandments that we have from the Bible itself, from the Word of God, thou shalt not kill. All right? Apart from that, all right, apart from that, apart from that, any legal system has its flaws, and not every time that someone is convicted of a crime necessarily means that they are in truth and in fact guilty, because people can be blamed for something that they have no knowledge about. I have seen it happen before. and it can and always will happen again. Like they say, history repeats itself. People get convicted for crimes every day that they are not aware of, that they are never took part in.
I quite understand what the young man said. And yes, I feel for the person who may be wrongly convicted. But I am saying so, in the case where the person is rightly convicted, can you tell me whether there is any justification not to use the death penalty?
All right, Mrs. Weeks. Unless you were not there, Mrs. Weeks, unless you were not there, you have not witnessed it with your own eyes, or you were not taking part in the killing, you have no idea whether or not the person was rightly or wrongly convicted. It's always based on a jury of his peers. It is always based on, it is always based on a jury of his peers and the evidence that is brought forth. People can fabricate evidence at any time they want.
Wait. Hold on. You're debating. Can I?
Joseph is my name. I'm a citizen of the Commonwealth of Dominica. 4 years today is 4 years I'm waiting for justice. Innocently killed my son. You see it? 4 years today. And up to now, nothing. Now, when a man tells me, like what happened on the 3rd of November, that's okay? So you shake his hand. Thank you very much. You killed my grandmother, boy. Check your sin. Huh? Until it doesn't reach home, that's how we will talk. And you see, I'm convinced. You see, Amnesty is a group of ex-criminals. I'm convinced. I haven't done a research on them, but they are ex-convicts to me who will get away, and now they're fighting for other people. Now, Exodus and Leviticus talks about hanging. If you kill, you too must be killed. Because the blood is still crying to God. The innocent person blood is still crying. And that's what you have to take into consideration. When this young man, many years ago, killed this young girl in Bells, after he did what he did to this young girl, he chopped her up in pieces. You don't know that? And after he chopped her up in pieces, he burnt their house. Today he's eating and drinking. Left the family to mourn for their daughter, plus lost everything in their house. When you take this man who took this knife, put it into his mouth, drove all the way down the road, knew jolly well what he was going to do. Are you forgetting? Or you mustn't forget history. You all must not forget. My son died innocently. Go and see what was wrong with his friend. And allegedly may have killed him. I support the death penalty because the Bible talks about it. And don't tell me it is the Old Testament. It is part of the Bible. Because the blood of the innocent one is still crying out. And I will go to my grave supporting the death penalty.
I'm a student of the University of the West Indies, and like Mr. Joseph said and Mrs. Wick said, I do support the death penalty. And like Mr. Joseph rightly said, you don't feel it until it comes to your home. There are too many instances where a number of young people, middle-aged people who commit heinous crimes and they walk away free with it. Even in our own country, there are instances where they're on remand for 3-4 years, and after they walk away. I mean, if we sometimes show empathy and put ourselves in these people's shoes, it will definitely touch us. And I'm not saying that how does it go? To rights cannot make a wrong or something like that. But at the end of the day, you sort of show empathy, and I'm strongly believer of the death penalty. And I remember watching IDTV, and you all made a lot of statistics reference to the Americas and whatever. And I mean, they're right, because they're really the ones who implemented it and so on. But in the Caribbean, I think, and especially in Dominica, look at the number of cases we've had. I do believe that some people definitely should be sent to death penalty.
Good night to all. I'm Aldrich Sylvester. Tonight, I heard two very interesting positions on a topic which was very important to us all. And I sympathize with those who have lost family members to people, murderers, and people who senselessly kill, sometimes even sensibly kill. It doesn't matter. Once you kill, you don't deserve to walk amongst normal human beings. You don't deserve to walk amongst normal human beings. But if you, as a normal, honored citizen of this country, can lay your hand and agree to murder that person who committed murder, then you're as bad as them. That is what I think.
What about a rapist in the village? The rapist raped me. My father go and kill me, go and imprison my father? What do you think about that? So can't I argue, or can't anybody else argue that if it was for society, if it was a better society, you have to send that person on capital punishment, you're going to punish that person for doing something that could better the society? You can argue that. So, like, I'm not saying that capital punishment isn't understanding. I can understand capital punishment, but I am not for it. There's a difference in understanding.
Good night, everybody. I am not opposing what Mr. Joseph said, because when Jesus made the New Testament, he said that it is not to overrule the Old Testament, but to go accordance with it, right? But who are we to judge anybody? That is in God's hands. Even if the person kills somebody, that's not our responsibility to kill them, because God said that we should not take any life. However, at the same time, they made reference to advanced countries and first world countries such as the US, right? You have to take into consideration their statistics, because if they are greater advanced than us, right? They're technologically greater advanced than us. The margin of error is way smaller than our own. We are third world countries. So if we were to implement capital punishment, you can imagine the great margin of error we will implement in our country. So a lot of innocent people will be dying until we can upgrade our judicial system to that of a first world country.
My name is Mark Douglas. I happen to be the moderator's cousin, and I thank him for inviting me to see such an inspired debate, and I congratulate all the debaters. From my perspective, I view the death penalty as a means to an end, and we should be very careful not to confuse the death penalty as being the end. The end is justice. We all want a criminal justice system, or just a legal justice system, that provides justice where it is deserved. And in a society where I've heard a lot of the debaters talk about individuals who we know have committed murder being let out 10 years after that murder has been committed to be among society, whether or not we have a death penalty, whether or not we have any other type of punishment, that doesn't seem like justice is being served. So it doesn't seem that the focus needs to be on the death penalty in itself, but whether our justice system provides that justice, right? And you have to look at things as, you have to look at a number of factors that go into whether or not an individual is convicted, the quality of representation that that individual had, the checks and balances that exist in our criminal justice system. A lot of individuals, or a lot of the debaters, brought up the US as an interesting comparison for our debate. And I happen to be very familiar with the US criminal justice system, and it's one in which if you're convicted in a state court, you have a trial by a jury, you then have a right to appeal, you then have a right to an appeal in the state Supreme Court. After you've exhausted that, you then have the right to file a writ of habeas corpus, goes to a federal court, and then it can go all the way up to the Supreme Court. If we have a system that has that many checks and balances, certainly we can be more confident that after we've exhausted all of those checks and balances, that person would be guilty. If we do not have a system in which an individual who may be innocent does not have the right to go to other means of appeals, then that may be a reason that we have concern in implementing death penalty in this society, specifically in Dominica.
Well, you know, I hope the minister responsible for legal affairs is listening, because that was his brother. So I hope he's listening. The minister responsible for legal affairs and guaranteeing that system for which will be safe, the safeguards, is none other than Mark Douglas's brother, Ian Douglas. So I hope he's listening. Any other comments? I'd like to invite Mr. Claude Weeks on behalf of the judges to tell us who has won this exchange. Mr. Weeks.
Thank you, Mr. Tyanni. Good night, everyone. A very good night to everyone. Despite what Mr. Behanzin said about me, while I thank him for the compliment, I'm not here to cause any trouble. I was given a task, and you would expect that I'd had a long day, because being a prosecutor and in court for the entire day, and to come and share with you, I am hoping that everybody will have a good night rest after the results have been given. You don't expect me to stand here to give the results immediately. I am sure. Not at all. Not at all. I mean, you go to shows and the MC take a very long time before the results have been given. I know we have to go to school tomorrow and our workplaces. But let me just do, on behalf of the panel of judges, to critique a few areas. And you would expect that after a debate. I had the occasion to be a judge on more than one occasion or several occasions, including the State College. I'm of the view generally that both sides understood what they were asked to do, and that is to debate, of course, pro and opposing. What we collectively, the judges that we arrived at, we felt, taking one of the last criteria, that it was not really handled properly with respect to the referencing. And I think it's not only you all, I think it's almost a universal thing, where people, one of the things that we have to always remember is that when you're debating or you're making a presentation, it could be religious, political, whatever, you must have good referencing or biblios to ensure that you can justify what you're saying. So I'm a prosecutor. I do not stand before the magistrate and just talk. I must talk, but I must have enough backup, and the referencing must be solid and airtight so that it cannot be penetrated. So I thought that indeed was not handled, or all of us rather, thought that it was not handled properly. In terms of the general respect for opponents, I think it became very adversarial and heated sometimes. That is anticipated. But you have to remember, we've got to be always professional when we are doing debates. So we still have to be very professional. Yes, heated, yes, adversarial. And I can tell you, for me, I'm a heated person in the courtroom. But at the same time, you have to be professional. I think the delivery, the general delivery, I mean, everybody has their gifts, so we don't expect everybody to be great orators. But there are standards, though, for a debate, and I would say it was relative. There's always room for improvement, and I'm sure as people continue to debate, they will get better. We thought the State College, the number one speaker, am I correct, Jose Thomas? Am I correct? Yes, we thought that her presence was there. There was venom, but it doesn't say because there was venom. If you do not reference properly, then you lose a few points as well. So please allow me to balance, and you would expect me to balance. But we thought that, and Mr. Joseph is still there, we thought that indeed she carried herself with the presence, because your presence in a debate, there has to be an impact, a lasting impact, so that even when you go to your beds and for a long time, it will continue to resonate in your brains, your system, and your soul. So we thought that that was very good by virtue of what she executed. The other speakers, of course, they also did well, but she was, we would want to say that she was outstanding in that regard. Although statistics, and Mr. Joseph will allude to that as well, we thought that the statistics, many of us mentioned, or the debaters rather, mentioned statistics. Many of the debaters mentioned a few other things, but what we found is that you all did not, generally speaking, did not establish their statistics by justifying the relevancy of the debate. What I'm saying is that if you get statistics, somebody mentioned, or a few people mentioned the statistics, where did you get it from? What source? How updated is the statistics? So you don't come around on a wonderful debate and you push statistics on papers and hoping that it is logical. So you have to justify it with the issues and apply it. And who's the best person to try to assist you in that regard, because every day you would have to apply that. We thought too that there's a lot of reference have been made about the United States of America. Don't take us wrong, there's nothing wrong in that, to make reference to the United States of America, the United Kingdom, the United Nations, and all the international bodies. But there's a concept that we call comparative analysis. And that is to say, in Dominica, bearing in mind we're in this environment, debating the pros and cons, read the death penalty, would have anticipated that people would have adequately used contemporary utterances made by our academics here, the religious people, as it were. Our chronicle, I'm not too sure if anybody mentioned our newspaper, any of our newspaper during the discourse. Whether the Chronicle, whether the Sun, whether what's the other one, Dominica News Online, whether DA Vibes, because so many people are writing on that. And we have experts in Dominica and intellectuals in Dominica. So that could be taken on board with what we already have, the United States of America, and seek to bring a balance or equilibrium to the discussion or the debate. And that was not handsomely or spectacularly done. I know we'll get better as time comes, but it's important that we do that. I thought we divorced ourselves from Dominica when we could have made a lot more utterances. We mentioned Trinidad, we mentioned Jamaica, and we believe that more could have been done in that regard. Of course, we tabulated, we ensured that we did it about 3-4 times so that we did not shortchange anyone. And the University of the West Indies Open Campus and the State College, generally, we would say, and I'm reporting on behalf of the panel of judges, that indeed we could deem it as a relatively sound, cogent debate or discuss tonight. And I think I should take the opportunity to say that you should applaud yourself tonight. Absolutely no doubt about it. As I conclude, let me just give you that dessert to think about before the result come out. Let me just give you that dessert. The debate between abolitionists and those who favor capital punishment, and I'm reading from a criminal justice book 2010, the debate between abolitionists, and abolitionists are those who look forward and who are vociferously and feverishly working towards the abolition of capital punishment or the death penalty, and those who favor capital punishment is very, very old. So we're debating that now in the contemporary times. It's not anything phenomenal. It has been debated many, many years, and it will continue to be debated, and I think all of us will be expired, and it will be debated. And one of the earliest debates about the death penalty was recorded by Greek philosopher Plato regarding Socrates. So we could have brought in a bit of philosophy to the debate. And Plato regarding Socrates, who was convicted by the Athenians of corrupting the morals of the youth, and he was sentenced to death. A friend tried to convince Socrates that he should escape because he was wrongfully convicted, and that came up a lot in the debate, and said that other cities would welcome him as a citizen because they would recognize that the sentence was unjust. Socrates, he refused, however, arguing, but whether in battle or in a court of law or in any other place, he must do what his city and his country order him, or he must change their view of what is just. He who has experience of the manner in which we order justice and administer the state and still remains has entered into an implied contract. And Mr. Joseph, that's what I'm telling you before we started, that he will do as we command him. And this argument, there is an implicit contract between the individual and the state. It means, therefore, that having said that, I know you're restless, but please don't. We have arrived. The University of the West Indies and the State College. The University of the West Indies, 185 in one way. The State College, 193. Remember we had had 3 judges. So I'm giving you collectively what we've arrived at, and you'll get the total figure. If you continue, you probably would know by then. So we've not finished yet. Yeah, Thomas. Yes, Thomas from the State College. Yes, I'm going to win second. All right, thank you. Yes. Okay, Jose, and second one?
First place, that's the winners, and I put second place is also in group.
Okay, of the debate. Okay, yeah. Right, very well. Okay. We apologize for that short break. I was just getting certain instructions, and you must understand that authority has to be obeyed. Yes. So let me just take it again. 185, University of the West Indies, from one of the judges, and 193 coming from a second judge. 207, University of the West Indies. The State College, 175. University of the West Indies, 195. And the State College, 188. I will go over the results again. Listen carefully. University of the West Indies, 185. The State College, 193. Second judge, 207, University of the West Indies, and 175. And the third judge, 195. And the last one, 188. So in total now, collectively, the University of the West Indies and the State College, who were there tonight in this debate, State College 556 points, and the University of the West Indies, who indeed are the winners, are 587 points. Okay, listen up. The outstanding speaker for the night in this debate goes to none other than Jose Thomas from the State College. To a right way? Yeah. Yes, please. Thank you, dear. Well done. Well done. Keep on debating. The second place in this discourse or debate tonight goes to the State College, who is a sum of $500 EC. Who is collecting for the State College? All of you come collectively. And of course the winners, there will always be a winner, and there will always be a group of person who come in second place. There are no losers. If you listen up, if we want to be professionals as young people, some of you are going to be lawyers because you have the debating ability, and everybody is not going to win a case. But it's all about, did you do justice to the debate tonight? Did you do justice to it? Take it out. Have you learned from it? Are we going further with it than to think that we've lost? And tonight we commend the winners as well. The University of the West Indies Open Campus with the first prize of $750 cash. Well done, sir. Well done. Right. Well done. That will be for the that's it. We will have a panel discussion afterwards. So yeah. Maybe some other time. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Very good. Yes.